Our last speaker this evening is Stephan Kramer, President of the State Agency for the Protection of the Constitution in Thuringia, Germany. The agency's task is to avert all efforts meant to harm the state of Thuringia, Germany, the free democratic basic order, and the German population on the state level, in cooperation with the federal and other state agencies. The agency collects and analyzes information about extremist, terrorist, and any other efforts posing a threat to security, and about foreign intelligence services activities directed against Germany.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm speaking to you from the town of Erfurt, capital of the state of Thuringia in Germany, on the occasion of commemorating the so-called Kristallnacht on November 9th, 1938. While we undoubtedly need to remember the historical facts, I want to also turn your attention to the highly disturbing present developments. Neo-Nazis and white supremacists' ideology is infiltrating parliaments, the military, the police, and other public institutions, also here in Germany these days. I want to thank my distinguished colleagues from the Miller Center at Rutgers University in New Jersey and friends from the International March of the Living for the chance to share my thoughts with you today. First of all, let me take you back in time. More than 13 years ago, on July 15, 2007, we commemorated the 70th anniversary of the establishment of the Buchenwald concentration camp here in Thuringia. Former prisoners of the Buchenwald concentration camp warned against the trivialization of fascism. Quote, "The good beginnings of commemorating the victims of National Socialism would be overshadowed by the global spread of war, nationalism and racism," quote, and said the then president of the International Buchenwald Dora Committee, Bertrand Herz, in Weimar. Quote, "The politicians, the historians and the fighters for the preservation of the commemoration still have a lot of work ahead of them so that the fertile womb can no longer give birth," quote, said Herz also at this occasion. Quote, "Back then, 1945, we would never have dreamed that there were right-wing forces in Germany again today who dare and are allowed to demonstrate in our cities," end of quote, said Ottomar Rothman, who had been a political prisoner in Buchenwald from 1943 to 1945. Quote, "The democratic rights guaranteed in the German constitution should not be a license to march by fascist groups," quote, end, said Rothman. As for myself, I took part in the event on behalf of the Central Council of Jews in Germany and spoke to the survivors and their families. I told them, we, the young generation, will take over the baton of remembrance and live up to the responsibility. That, my dear friends, was 13 years ago in 2007. And yes, I guess at the time I sort of could define myself as part of a relatively young generation. Today I'm speaking to you on the occasion of the commemoration of November 9th, 1938, and at a time when the Nazis are not only marching on the streets and chanting loudly, "Who loves Germany is an anti-Semite." Rather, the new right sits in all state parliaments and in the Bundestag, the federal parliament. Yes, Europe in general has experienced an unprecedented shift to the right and a renaissance of nationalism. But Germany, the country which once planned and executed the Holocaust in such a horrifyingly thorough manner, must pay special attention to what is happening. Let's remember, it was exactly 82 years ago on November 9th, 1938, that the Nazi regime launched its brutal, furiously destructive all-out attack against the Jews. On the night of November 9th to 10th, 1938, more than 1,200 synagogues and prayer rooms in Germany were set on fire, desecrated and destroyed. Among them, 23 synagogues in Thuringia alone. In 48 hours, more than 100 Jews were murdered in all of Germany, and around 8,000 Jewish-owned businesses were looted. And KZ Buchenwald was one of the 980 concentration camps and more than 40,000 other camps of the Germans. The victims of these camps also included political opponents like Sinti and Roma, and strangers to the community, including homosexuals, homeless people, Jehovah's Witnesses, and convicts, as well as Soviet prisoners of war. Namely, the need to remember the atrocities of the National Socialist murder machine and to commemorate their victims. It's about a necessary warning for the present and the future against the evil of the past, my friends. And members of parliament who wear a blue cornflower on their lapels at memorial events and claim not to know what is used to be the secret identification mark of the Nazis who were banned in Austria between 1933 and 38. These are not derailments, my friends, but targeted provocations and transgressions. First provoke, then deny. That's the game. That shows the true face of these democratically elected representatives, and nobody should say later, we have not seen or heard it. At this point, I would also like to remind you that although the lessons of the Nazi era were taken into account into the German Constitution in 1948, the basic consensus on real examination of the German past had not emerged in West Germany until the late 1980s. For this reason, I consider it essential to say on this day without ifs and buts, the memory of victims of the Nazi regime is and will remain an existential part of the German democratic self-image in our free society. Remembrance work is not a burden or a historical mortgage, but a task that must be passed on from generation to generation. Remembrance is an inner compass to defend human dignity and our freedom. There's more than one reason to commemorate. Of course, we owe it to the victims to keep them in honor of their memory. Letting them vanish into oblivion would be unforgivable. We also owe it to their family members, their descendants, to see their horrific fate as part of a collective memory. There is, however, as I said, another reason. Upholding this commemoration should be a self-interest of every democratic state based on human rights. Remembrance is part of our free democratic basic order in Germany. By remembering the darkest chapter in history, we remind ourselves that any slide into anti-democracy, xenophobia, or racism is dangerous. We know where this is going, and it is not as if the unacceptable only begins when the situation reaches Nazi proportions, like between 1933 and 1945. The no-go zone of a democracy begins much earlier, and not only with a full-blown dictatorship. It begins where respect, not mere tolerance, for fellow human beings ends, where the basic values of democracy and the rule of law are called into question. The falsifiers of history and hushers ultimately strive for a different state. The burning desire to gloss over the Nazi era, indeed, if not to claim it had positive aspects, often goes hand in hand with a tendency towards violence. It is a fact that people who take an active stand against right-wing extremist hatred and racism feel threatened and intimidated even when they are not physically attacked. I think we can all vividly imagine what the racist hooligans, comrade-in-arms, and Nazis think of memory of the Nazi victims. On Sunday, August 30th, 2020, the Reichstag in Berlin was stormed as protests against the nation's pandemic response grew. Hundreds of far-right activists waving the black, white, and red flag of the pre-1918 German Empire, which once inspired the Nazis, broke through a police barrier and tried to force their way into the building. After a few minutes, the attack was over, and police, though vastly outnumbered, managed to push the crowd back. The incident turned out to be a highly motivating success for the extreme right, challenging today's government once again. On social networks, right-wing extremists posted pictures of themselves and their weapons, calling for a storm on Berlin. My friends, technology plays a significant role. The protests would probably not be possible without the closed environments of Telegram channels and WhatsApp groups. And they are unthinkable without YouTube's algorithm, which keeps showing you more and more of the same once you have watched one video. Also, the US conspiracy theory, QAnon, goes global and is thriving in Germany. It has found fertile ground in the putsch fantasies and anti-Semitic tropes long popular on Germany's far-right fringe. The extreme right is delighted. Recently, a high-ranking AfD federal staff member was taped secretly by a TV channel, Pro7, in conversation where he emphasized that Germany has to get worse in order to promote the support for the far-right AfD among the people. quote, immigrants and refugees who come to Germany could later be shot or gassed in order to handle the problem, unquote. Over the last 14 months, far-right terrorists have assassinated a regional conservative politician on his front porch near the city of Kassel because he supported immigration, and attacked a synagogue in Halle in eastern Germany, killing ordinary citizens on the street. In February, terrorists killed 10 people in Hanau. Even before the pandemic hit Germany, far-right extremism and far-right terrorism had been officially identified as the biggest danger to German democracy. For years, in opposition to that, it had been belittled and neglected as a possible threat, although we had more than 500 murders by right-wing perpetrators since the creation of the Federal Republic of Germany. At the same time, senior intelligence officers today express concern about far-right extremists infiltrating German security services. Cases of far-right extremists in the military and in the police, some hoarding weapons and explosives, have multiplied in the last years. It's not just hoarding material for the day X, but actively preparing with logistics and safe houses for undercover operations, such as kidnapping and killing government officials and political opposition representatives. Lists of possible targets have been found. I know that is not new, especially to our friends in the United States. But it's new to us here in Germany. In July, the federal government disbanded an entire unit of the German Special Forces Brigade, the KSK, because it was infested with far-right extremists. German Federal President Steinmeier described the situation as follows, quote, far-right extremism has deep roots in our society. It is a serious danger, end of quote. To many people, defamation, hatred, and violence are once again part of the legitimate means of political debate. Xenophobic and nationalist statements are enjoying increased approval, and confidence in the functionality of democracy is falling noticeably. My friends, if we want to effectively fight racism for the future and save our democracies, then we must convincingly convey to our citizens and children that no matter what sexual, ideological, cultural, social, religious, or other differences we might have, we as human beings have the same rights, feel, think, and suffer alike. Responsible politics for a society means not to stir up resentments and prejudices, but to reduce them. It means treating one another with the same respect and responsibility, relearning to have compassion for one another and to be curious about one another. My friends, knowledge alone does not immunize against misanthropy. We also need empathy. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, we're in political uncertain times, and it is not uncommon for many today, at least here in Germany, to feel reminded of the times of crisis in the Weimar Republic. But optimism, my friends, all alone will not lead us to open societies, a democratic and bright future. The Weimar Republic failed at the time not because of too many Nazis, but because of too few Democrats who took to the streets to fight for their democracy. We should seriously consider that today. Thank you for your attention, and let me end with Leolam Lo'ot, Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you so much. Bye.